told you that there is a group of people out there who have been accused of everything from human rights violations to dealing drugs to enabling murder. The good news is those people are currently in prison. The bad news is they aren't the inmates. Let me explain in a segment called How Did We Get Here? Tonight, we're going to talk about prison conditions, and that can be tough because a lot of people assume that prisons are filled with bad people, so we don't need to worry about them. So let me get this out of the way up top. Yes, prisons may be filled with people who have made at least one bad decision, but so are Nickelback concerts and divorce court. And yet we still treat those people like human beings. So we need to do the same for prisoners. Now, a few months ago, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a civil rights lawsuit against the state of Alabama. Now, this is interesting for two reasons. First, because I didn't know you could sue a whole state. Friggin' watch your back, Florida. And second, because the lawsuit says Alabama's poor management is leading to homicides, rapes, and serious injuries in its prisons. Alabama has the most violent prison system in America. And having the most violent anything in America is a very big deal. It's like having the flakiest croissant in France or being the most unhinged person in a Facebook thread. Now, I know I said that I'd explain all this to you, but honestly, I am not sure that I can. Now, the good news is I don't have to. Instead, we have quotes from inmates inside the Alabama Department of Corrections. You'll hear some tonight, and they are 100% real. So let's start with the living conditions. Saying that Alabama prisons are overcrowded is like saying that Shonda Rhimes shows are slightly horny. Sure, it's true, but it's also a huge understatement. The Bibb County Correctional Facility in Brent, Alabama was built to hold 918 inmates. It currently houses over 1,700. The Elmore Correctional Facility was built for 600 people and now has 960 inmates. There are clowns in tiny cars who hear those numbers and say, that's too crowded. Now, with the overcrowding and unsanitary conditions in those prisons, it is not surprising that COVID is raging. Elmore, the facility with 960 inmates, had 191 people test positive in one day, which is horrifying. Usually the only time you see that much alarming positivity is when you're watching The Sound of Music. Really, Maria? Brown paper packages? That's your favorite? Raise your standards, girl. Maria, I need you to listen to me. If you marry him, you are going to be doing the same job you're doing right now, but for free. Don't fall for it. Worse, once the prisoners get sick, they are often ignored. Across the U.S., prisons haven't done enough to quarantine sick inmates, putting everyone around them in grave danger of getting sick or even dying. According to the Bureau of Justice statistics, being incarcerated in Alabama is 3 times deadlier than cancer. And deadlier than cancer is one of those phrases you should never have to hear, like bloodier than Squid Game or dumber than a Kushner. Unfortunately, it gets worse because one of the deadliest hazards in the Alabama prison system is the guards themselves. An inmate named James said, "I've been stabbed 4 times. I've been beaten so many times I can't even count. None of those stabbings came from an inmate. Not one of those beatings came from an inmate." Now, if you're thinking maybe that prisoner is lying, that's fair. Let's hear from another one. Larry said, "The guards are handcuffing these inmates and beating them and killing them." And BJ, who was incarcerated, said of his experience, "The physical abuse is rampant. Rape is everywhere. It is like living in a zoo." But hey, maybe you don't believe any prisoners. Then listen to the DOJ report that talks about an officer who took a handcuffed and compliant inmate out of an observation room, threw him onto the ground, and then punched, kicked, and beat him with a baton. And when he was finished, his supervisor, who had watched the whole thing, said, "That's fair." I want to look at you right now and say, this isn't who we are, America, but until we learn to treat human beings with dignity and stop letting this happen in our names, it's exactly who we are. Remember when BJ said living in prison was like living in a zoo? Well, here's the difference. If this had happened in a zoo, people would be rioting in the streets to make sure it never happens again. Don't let a white person hear about a sad giraffe. They will lose their minds. Now, I know some of you might be saying, this sounds terrible, but what does it have to do with me? Well, first of all, the Alabama prison system is the worst example, but prisons all over the country have similar issues. But also, Now that they're using federal money to build those prisons, you are an investor, and that means you get a say. So, how can you make a difference? Well, the good news is there are already people working on these issues. You can donate your time or money to places like the Equal Justice Initiative. And if you specifically want to help Alabama inmates, donate to the Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. But most importantly, we can't just look away, because these are our cousins and our uncles and our fathers and our sons. They are us. Hell, it could be me. I have a best-selling book, 2 TV jobs, and my own show. But every day I leave the house knowing that if I cross paths with the wrong police officer when they're having a bad day and looking for someone to take it out on, I could be in jail tomorrow. Y'all all be talking about she shouldn't have been talking to the officer like that, please. America's prison problem is not some distant problem, it's our problem. And I know I said I'd explain all this, but in this one case, I do not know exactly how we got here. I just know that it's time to get out.